let's talk about sales today and cold calling. Actually, it's something that's not a good fit for everyone. But today I had a call with a new client that just started with me actually today, and we were talking about how to get as many clients as possible in the shortest time. And the idea was to do some cold calling. Now, I don't do cold calling myself, and a lot of people are really scared of cold calling. A lot of people are actually hate selling in general, right? They're very anxious about it, uncomfortable with selling. And so I just wanted to talk about it a little bit, because it's not only about cold calling, it's about the approach to sales in general. And so I said cold calling is not for everyone. It's not a good fit for every business. And let's start with that. When is cold calling a good fit? And when is cold outreach in general a better fit than something else maybe? So the more focused you are, the more niched you are, the better and easier it will be for you to run cold calling and cold DM and cold outreach of any sort campaign. And let me explain what that means. The idea is that, like, a lot of consultants, agency owners, fractionals, they will try to go very broad when it comes to their niche. So they will try to attract as many clients and leads as possible, basically casting a wide net, right? And that wide net becomes, when you stretch the net, you have the holes so big that you actually lose a lot of leads, right? So what is counterintuitive, you have to shrink the net, cast a smaller net, and then that way you can catch more fish. And so what needs to happen first, you have to really niche down and focus on the niche. Now, when it comes to niching down, and I talked about this in quite a few moments in my podcast on YouTube and my other content, is there's two elements to niche. One is the industry or type of a business that you work with. The other one is the problem that you're solving. Okay, so if you think about two circles, and then the intersection of those two circles is your niche. Okay, so niche is not about just the industry. The niche is the intersection of the industry and the problem that you're solving. Now, like I said, a lot of people will go very broad on both, and so how that represents in practice is basically they will say, for example, I help SMB, small medium businesses, with marketing. That's a very broad audience, right? And a very broad problem that you're solving. And so if you wanted to run any cold campaign on this, then first of all, like, who do you target? Like, everyone that has a business. And then what do you tell them? I can help you with everything. And that's just not going to work. It's not appealing at all, right? So for example, I get a lot of cold emails from people who say, oh, do you need a website? No, I don't. I don't need a website. I do have a website, right? And so it's a very broad, I'm sure this is a very broad campaign that they're running to a very broad audience. Everyone who has a business, probably someone will need a website, right? So that is not gonna work well. Now, how you can actually narrow it down, you have two options, or three options actually. Option number one is go a little bit narrow, or as narrow as possible, on the industry. So instead of saying, I work with SMBs, you say, I work with dentists in Toronto. That's a very narrow audience, right? And then when you're narrow on the audience, you can be more generic on the approach or on the problem that you solve, because you are seen as a specialist when it comes to dentists, or specialist when it comes to any other industry, right? And then if you're a specialist in that specific industry, then you can be broad on the solutions for that industry. So I am helping dentists in Toronto with their marketing. That's very broad, right? But then you specialize in dentists in Toronto. Now, the other option is to go the other way around, which is go narrow on the problem and broad on the audience. So you can say, I work with SMBs, sure, but then you have to be very specific on the problem. You can say, I work with SMBs and help them implement QuickBooks, for example, or something like even more specific. QuickBooks being the accounting software, right? So you can you have to go narrow on one or the other. the best option is to go narrow on both, with the caveat of like you don't want to go too narrow of like I work with dentists on this street. If there's like 3 dentists, obviously your market has to be big enough, right? But you want to go as narrow as possible. Okay, so when you are narrow, then your cold outreach will actually make a lot of sense, because then you're specifically targeting Toronto dentists, and what kind of problems they have. So if your solution is also narrow, you can say, I help Toronto dentists decrease no shows for appointments or consultations, right? That is very specific audience and a very specific problem that you're identifying they might have. And so in this case, cold outreach will work, whether that's cold calling, whether that's cold email, whether that's cold DMs on LinkedIn. Okay, so that's prerequisite number 1. Now, if we're talking specifically about cold calling in itself, then there's a couple of things I would like you to think about. Now, this framework that I'll share with you I'll use cold calling as an example because that's what I discussed with the client, but you can apply the same framework, the same strategy, the same mindset, the same approach to any cold outreach that is a communication outreach, which is like, DMs on Instagram, DMs on LinkedIn, DMs on X, whatever that is, right? Email as well, but email is less conversational and it's a longer process, right? You send an email to someone, then they have to open it up. They will maybe respond to you or not, right? It's just a slower process. It's not really a back and forth. But if your process is all about, or if your sales process is, in DMs or WhatsApp or Slack or whatever that is, if it's communication, maybe, just texting, then this will work as well. So we'll use cold calling, but you can also use this as a framework for cold outreach in general, whenever this is being done over texting in some shape or form, right? So first step is like you have to prepare for the call, or you have to prepare for the communication, right? So you really need to know your ICP. You have to be very, very clear. Like I said, you have to be very clear on the niche, be clear on who you're calling, who you're talking to, right? Who is the title, the role, industry, what are their pain points? You need to do your homework. You cannot be lazy. The lazier you are in terms of that prep, and the lazier you are in general in your marketing, the wider the net will be, and the less specific you will be, less relevant you will be, and that leads to lower conversion rates, right? So you have to spend some time getting ready before you can actually talk to someone, right? So know your ICP first. Then you have to have a very clear offer, right? What specific measurable problem do you solve actually, right? So again, goes back to that second circle, if you will, with like, okay, I have this very specific ICP, I understand their pain points, I know who I'm talking to, and this is the very specific solution that I have for them, right? Now, when it comes to sales in general, my clients ask me like, well, what is the script? And there isn't really a script. There is, as in like, there's not scripted flow or scripted, message exchange. It's more so like a flexible talk track, right? So track as in like flow framework, right? It's not a robotic script that you read from the screen. And so you need to have some bullet points, discussion points, but then it's very fluid because the conversation is also fluid. It really depends what the answer from the other person on the other side is, right? Whether that's DM or call. So there's really no script to read. There's bullet discussion points, right? It's like a good presentation when you have slides. You don't really read from the slides, but the slides help you keep momentum and keep track of what you're supposed to talk about, right? So those are the kind of pre-call. This is a pre-call prep. Now, when you actually call someone, you need to, the purpose of the first kind of, let's say 30 seconds is to create curiosity and not pressure and just like open up the floor, right? So you could say something like, and this is what I told my client, you could say something like, hey, name, hey, Luke, whatever. I just started a business 6 months ago and I'm helping XYZ do XYZ. I'm helping this industry do this, right? And I was just wondering if I could pick your brain about what do you see in the industry? Because I see that you have been in the industry for 25 years. As you can say, I wanted to see like, what do you see in the industry when it comes to XYZ, right? And so that opening line positions you as someone who's curious, who's doing a little bit of market research, instead of like, hey, I'm calling from this company and we sell this. Are you interested in this software, right? So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to like how you show up for the call, is you have to be very calm, very casual, and very confident at the same time. Like, you're not selling, you're not overselling. And actually, the purpose of this cold call or cold conversation is not to sell anything. The purpose of this is to sell the next step. And the next step being showing your offer, maybe offering them a full-blown discovery call or demo or whatever that is, right? So your first step is not to sell. And if you come to this call or conversation with a mindset of like, I'm not selling anything, I'm here to understand whether the person I'm reaching out to has the problem that I can fix, whether I can fix the problem, and if they're interested in fixing that problem, right? So you come there, you come with curiosity, you come with attention, you come there to serve them and understand what is their situation, and not to sell. The only thing you are kind of selling, quote unquote, is the next step. But you don't do that in the first 30 seconds. In the first 30 seconds, you frame the call. You can frame it as a market research. You can frame it as picking their brain. You can frame it as, being new to the area. You have to think about the best way to do it, and you can obviously play with it, right? So that's number one. Number two is you kind of do a relevance check, right? So the purpose of this is to see if they have the problem, right? And then show them that you're not wasting their time, show them that you're not a random person, show them that you understand what they do, right? So in this case, you could say like, okay, cool, thank you so much for your time, and I understand this is out of the blue. So I'm curious, like I said, in the past 6 months, I opened my business, and I'm curious because there's very interesting thing that I spotted, and it's blah, 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 right? Very interesting that I spotted that a lot of dentists in Toronto don't really have any follow-up system to make sure that the appointments are happening, for example, right? And I was just curious, do you guys see the same thing in your business, right? And so you are trying to understand what is the problem and whether they have the same problem you have identified. And by telling them that you see this challenge, you're also telling them that you understand this audience, you understand the industry, right? And so your goal here is to listen to signals, not just for answers. You listen for the signals, because they might say one thing, but the actual signal is something else, right? So you need to listen to the signal of pain, of frustration, of curiosity, right? Those things are a green light for you to move forward as well. Then your next step is to do like a small micro pitch, right? So you position your solution as the fix, right? You need to keep it tight. You don't want to oversell. You don't want to over pitch. When you ask them like, hey, do you see the same thing? And they say, yeah, we say the same thing. And you're like, oh, got it. Yeah, it's so crazy because that's exactly, what I helped client XYZ do. By the way, do you know them? Like you could start building the rapport that way as well. I say, hey, do you know dentist, Silver Dental on like whatever street, right? Yeah, you do. Yeah, that's exactly what we helped them with. And they went from, 50% of no-shows to 13, right? And so you present your solution, but you frame it as you present a case study, but you frame it as like, oh, that's interesting, and that's exactly what we did. Like, it's a very soft way to show off, right? So that is your micro pitch. Then this has to be very short, clean. If they're curious, they'll say, oh, interesting. Okay, how did you do that, right? And so when that happens, when you see kind of opening to schedule the next call, that's what you do. Because at this point, you want to book the next step, right? You want to book the actual reconversation where you can come in with a completely different purpose of now showing them the solution that you that you have. So you can say something like, hey, is this worth a proper 20-minute chat to unpack this and show you how we did that, or show you the example with the other client? If yes, you book it immediately in the calendar. If no, you pivot to a research mode, right? If no, then you have to do this. And by the way, this is a very common problem. When people cold call or DM and they get a no, they immediately go, okay, thanks, and then run away. Or they turn into this kind of salesman, greasy hair car salesman of like, yeah, hold on a minute, but you're missing on this opportunity, or I'm gonna lower the price, blah blah blah. Like, don't do that. So you want to leverage this and use this opportunity to learn about the market, right? If they said no, then you should say, hey, totally fair. While I'll have you, mind if I ask you a few questions, like a quick question for my own research? And then you ask one or two questions. These questions might be, why not? Why you're not interested in this? Oh, I don't have the time. Okay, and then based on that, you can say, oh, if tomorrow's not a good time, like, when is a good time? You can say, when you think about this problem, this area of your business, what's the biggest frustration? Because maybe you came with a solution, but maybe they don't have that frustration, right? So that's another question you might have. The other one would be, what would make solving this a no-brainer for you? In other words, if I had a magic wand, what would that magic wand do to your business? Like, what would you like to fix, and what would be a great solution, right? Another thing that I like to ask is like, okay, well, have you tried anything else in the past? Because maybe my solution, maybe there's a challenge, there's a problem, but maybe my solution is not the right fit, or maybe not, it does make sense, right? So when you ask them, okay, well, if they tried something else, then they say yes, and you can say, okay, cool, what happened? How did it work for you, right? So you can see how those questions after the no are actually giving you market research, right? So you're not losing anything doing cold calling or DMs, you're learning a lot, right? And so the value at the end also is like, even if they say no, you should say something like, hey, I appreciate your time. By the way, I've got a quick, like a one-pager summary of how we did that for that client. Would you like me to send it over, right? And if they say yes, then you ask them for the email and then send it over, and that way you can kind of continue the conversation, and maybe that one pager will also spark their curiosity. So that those will be the steps to kind of to go through what you cold call or cold DM. Now, what happens after that call or DM? You have to log all your learnings, because what I see a lot of consultants do is they get a yes or a maybe or a no. By the way, maybe is the worst answer. You want to go either for a yes or a no. Maybe is not really an answer. So they go for a yes or a no, and then that's it. They are not drawing any conclusions from it. So you need to learn from this, right? After each call, you need to log down the pain points, the objections, the phrases that they used. I use Notion to note down, but you can use Notion, Airtable, Google Sheets, notes, just notes. But it's good to have some sort of a digital version of it, so that you can filter and then look for common denominators. The way I do that is then I copy the transcripts or the logs from the calls or DMs. I put it in ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to find common denominators and interesting, insights from it, and that fuels my content, and that fuels obviously helps me learn for the future, right? So you do that. You need to track conversion patterns as well. So like, what hooks, what questions led to a booked call, the second call that you're trying to get them on, in which you would present your solution, right? And you basically build a swipe file of the objections and language and buying signals. When it comes to the mindset, when it comes to mindset of like how to approach these calls, the theme of this is kind of picking their brain. Instead of selling, I'm here to learn whether you have the problem that I can solve, whether my solution makes sense, and I'm here to learn whether we're a good match, and if this is making sense for me to show what I have to offer, right? That's number one. Number two, you have to be respectful of their time. Especially when you cold call, you might be catching them at a weird time, having lunch in between in between meetings, commuting, traveling, whatever, right? So be respectful of the time, and be in a position where like, hey, I'm kind of calling you, I'm here disturbing you. I understand that, and like I respect that, right? As well, I respect your time. Remember that every call is either a client or a lesson. So you either win or learn. There's no other option. And you're not chasing, you're not selling, you're qualifying to see whether your hypothesis, whether your offer is making sense for this client, right? Any rejection, any no is just data, right? So you're not really like, it's so hard to do calls and DMs and in general be in sales because you are rejected so often. And so you need to understand that this is data. This is just you learn from it, and not take it personally as well. That's very important. Where when someone is being not receptive, or like don't give you constructive feedback, they're like being rude or something like that, don't take it personally as well. It has no impact, and it's not a proxy, or it's not a way for you to evaluate or see a value of your program or your service, right? The fact that they have a different opinion about you shouldn't make any difference, and shouldn't be impacting you in terms of like how valuable you are or how valuable your product or offer is. Absolutely, you have to listen to feedback and you have to listen to your market. But if you caught someone at a bad time on a bad day, that has nothing to do with it, right? And obviously, if someone is rude, disrespectful, just say, hey, it looks like I caught you on the wrong time, at the wrong time. Just hang up. That's it. Just stop. If you're on DMs and someone is being rude, disrespectful, block them. That's it, So the way to protect your mindset is I just caught them at a bad time, right? So those would be my comments on like how to do sales in terms of cold calling and cold outreach in general. This was specifically about cold calling, but like I said, it's applicable to any type of cold outreach, right? So to summarize, you have to do pre-call prep. Your ICP, your solution that you have. No script, just script bullet points, right? You frame the call by saying why you're here, who you are, what you see in the market. Check for relevance if they see the same thing. Do a micro pitch by showing that you did something similar and help the competitor, for example, in a similar situation. Book the next call. If you get a no, make sure you learn from this as well. So squeeze the lemon as much as possible in that sense, right? And even if you get a no, try to give something of value, because then they will see you as someone who's valuable and not just cold call. And number two, you keep the door open to continue the conversation, right? So don't forget about the mindset, coming in with the curiosity, and just being strong about like, yeah, this has no impact on how I perceive the value of my business if they say no, right? And if you caught them at a bad time, you caught them at a bad time. If they're disrespectful, hang up. That's it. Well, anyway, hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you soon in the next one.